Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Reverend Dr. Sarah Griffith Lund. Sarah loves to partner with others to share hope and healing. She's an ordained minister and has served as pastor to churches in Brooklyn, New York, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Reverend Dr. Lund also served as regional minister in the Florida Conference of the United Church of Christ and as a vice president for Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis. She currently serves as Minister for Disabilities and Mental Health Justice on the national staff of the UCC and as senior pastor of First Congregational UCC of Indianapolis. She holds degrees from Trinity University, Princeton Theological Seminary, Rutgers University, and McCormick Theological Seminary. She received the Dell Award for Mental Health Education at the 30th General Synod of the UCC and the Princeton Engels Preaching Award for Excellence in Preaching. We've previously interviewed Sarah for her book, Blessed Union, Breaking the Silence About Mental Health and Marriage, and for another book titled Blessed Youth, Breaking the Silence About Mental Health with Children and Teens. Her new book is Blessed Minds, Breaking the Silence About Neurodiversity, out from Chalice Press. Now, if all of that isn't enough, Sarah serves on the board of the Faith and Action Project to End Poverty at Christian Theological Seminary, as board director for Faith in Indiana, as a trustee of Piedmont University, as board director of Mental Health America, as board director of Disability Ministry Network, and on think tanks for mental health and faith with the U.S. Department of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. She's also the UCC denominational representative for Bread for the World Indiana chapter, and is consulted with the United Church of Canada, the World Council of Churches, and with Sesame Street. My goodness, what a prolific achiever. I mean, it's just so impressive, Sarah. You can learn more at sarahgriffithlund.com and, of course, at chalicepress.com. So, Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. Again, so great to see you and so great to see how much you're accomplishing.
Oh, thank you, Brian. It is an exciting time to be collaborating. I feel like together, folks who care about justice, when we partner, we can move things forward in a positive way. So thank you for inviting me into the conversation.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so happy. I was looking forward to catching up with you and just, again, seeing the list of things that you've accomplished and that you're working on is just so impressive and so wonderful. So thank you for all of that work.
Thank you.
So,
I went through a time of discernment at one point in my path where I was wondering, what God was calling me to do. And I had a mentor help me create a personal vision statement.
huh,
And that's where I realized that my best self happens when I partner with other people. And so I had that vision of sharing hope, healing, and joy in partnership with others. And so being focused on that as my mission has really helped just connect me to people doing that work. And it's been a gift to me.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, everything that I've done that matters has been as a team, of
Mhm.
people in different forms, far different forms. But, I'm glad to see that you not only see that, but act upon it so effectively. So, I know you can't tell us about all the different things you're involved in, but is there anything in particular before we get to the book that you'd like to talk about?
Well, there's a lot of exciting things happening in the world of disability ministries. And so I'm currently working with Baylor University.
Hmm,
They have a new program they've launched working with faith communities around disability and inclusion.
hmm,
And so I've been in conversations with cohorts, and that's exciting because it is a broader effort across the church for people to be more intentional about
hmm,
what does belonging look like for people with disabilities and their families. And a lot of really creative work is happening.
hmm. Cool. So let's talk about the book. As I mentioned, the title is Blessed Minds, Breaking the Silence About Neurodiversity. So, how did this book come about?
Well, I've been exploring this question of what is the connection between mental health and faith, disabilities and faith. And so as I've looked at my own life and wondered about that and heard stories of others, I've sought to learn more and more about disabilities and mental health. And I was giving a talk at a class at Princeton Seminary about mental health and ministry. And afterwards, I was walking into town with the professor to get some lunch. And I said, "So, what's new in the classroom? What are you hearing from your students? What are they interested in?" And he said, "You know, a lot of the students are self-identifying as neurodivergent."
Hmm. Hmm.
And I said, "As what?" Neurodivergent. And I said, "I don't know what that is." And so that really
Right.
began this curiosity that I had, both about something new that I wanted to learn about, but also what seminary students are thinking about as they enter the ministry. And I love and care about the potential of the church and future leaders. I wanted to see if the church was going to be prepared for these seminarians when they graduate and are called to serve a church. I was just imagining search committees or ordaining committees as they meet a candidate and the candidate says, you know, "I'm neurodivergent." I was imagining that room and that
Hmm.
conversation. And I
Hmm.
thought we need a resource to
Hmm.
help train the church for the new leaders that God has called into ministry. So that's really what inspired the book, is a resource for the church as younger generations and even people in my generation of ministry, as we learn about ourselves and ways of thinking about our brains and neurodiversity. I have colleagues in my peer group. They say I'm neurodivergent. And so this is new language that's really about grassroots community. It's not a medical model. And that's what makes it so organic and
Hmm.
fluid. And so it was really fun to research for the book and to interview pastors and churches that are really at the forefront
Hmm.
of this movement for neurodiversity in the church.
Well, I think if anybody comes away from this, reading this book, and is not convinced that the church needs to get more involved in this area, they're missing a lot. But
Mhm.
that's to me what the book does, the best is kind of, lay out a convincing model and a convincing framework of how, how to do that, why the churches should.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of creative stuff happening online. So there's social media pages and websites that talk a lot about neurodiversity. It's showing up in a really profound way in education spaces
Mm,
as educators want to create learning environments for children. So there's
mm,
a few key thought leaders creating materials for teachers. And I basically wanted to do the same thing for churches, for pastors and lay leaders. And there's some powerful stories in the book. And one is from another pastor whose own child is neurodivergent, had a pretty difficult experience in the Sunday school where their child was. And if I can tell that brief story,
mhm.
I'd love to share that with the permission of the pastor. Her son uses a fidget. And if you don't know what a fidget is, it's basically any kind of thing that you can hold in your hand and manipulate. And prayer beads are my fidget. But a lot of children especially will have a little stuffed animal or a toy or a little car. And so her son had something like that, that he felt better when he could hold on to it and fidget with it. It helped him listen and pay attention. But these Sunday school teachers would always tell him he had to put that away and he couldn't have
Mm,
that in Sunday
mm,
school. And he didn't want to put it away. And so they physically would grab it from his
mm,
hands and then
mm,
put it on a high shelf where he couldn't reach it. And he'd get really upset. And so the pastor had to navigate, her volunteer Sunday school teachers really coming from a different era where children, sat still and
mhm,
quiet while
mhm,
they heard the Sunday school lesson. But it was painful for her whole family, and they ended up needing to leave the church because there just wasn't that space and grace to change the model at that point, and there'd been so much harm done. So now she's at a church that's kind of celebrates neurodiversity and is open to that way of doing things, and her son's doing really well. But it's kind of the sad story of what happens too often is that shame-based model that we
mhm,
have to act and look and talk a certain way. And if you don't, then you're shamed into feeling guilty until you change into whatever
Mm.
that status quo model is. And it's so harmful. And I don't think we've realized how much harm we've done in the past with that. But the good news is that we can change that model of church and we can help people understand neurodiversity. There are accommodations and accessibility things that are really easy and simple that make everyone feel more included and really feel like they belong in the church.
Well, your book will go a long ways to raising awareness alone about, some of those kinds of things. And I didn't really realize it, but throughout my career, my fidget was this.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
yeah.
I had a pen and I'd
Uh-huh.
continuously, open it up and put it back
Mhm.
throughout meetings. I probably bothered the heck out of people, but that was my fidget, and I didn't even really realize it as such, but it was just nervous energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the wonderful things that your book does is define many different terms, and one of them
Mhm.
is neurodiversity itself. So for folks who are not familiar with that, could you, just summarize that for us?
Yes, actually, I'm looking at the book now. There's a glossary. And so that was some
Yes.
feedback I had from early readers is there's so many terms. So each chapter has the key terms at the top, and then there's a glossary in the back. And as I mentioned, neurodiversity is a grassroots movement. It's not clinical or medical. So to be fair, there are lots of different definitions
Hmm. Hmm.
of neurodiversity, right?
Interesting.
And different spin-offs of it. But a general one that like to support is neurodiversity is the range of differences in brain function and behavior among all humans.
Hmm.
So it's a range of differences among brain function and behaviors. That's neurodiversity.
That's pretty broad.
Yes, it's very broad. So it's really saying, and it comes from the biological model of biodiversity
Huh.
that, our environments thrive in diversity. It's healthy. And Princeton Seminary's class about neurodiversity is based on this idea of a brain forest. So if you think of the forest and all the different species of trees, there's not usually just in a healthy forest, it's diverse. And so our brains are like that too. We're in a forest, all these different brains. So to think about, say, a church, if you have a Sunday school classroom, it's a forest of brains, right? And in the
Mhm.
sanctuary, in the pews, you have a forest of different brains. And it's to take away this model of good and bad or typical, atypical, and really say, we all have differences. And some people's differences mean that they need other ways of encountering the gospel or doing worship to really help them feel fully engaged.
Well, a huge learning for me when I was younger and in the business environment was, as my boss would put it, Brian, you need to learn to live in the gray. You know,
Ah.
that the world's not completely black and white. And I had,
Mhm.
grown up more as an engineer, and I kind of
Mhm.
thought it much more rigidly in, kind of binary terms. And so it was an important learning for me that I've reflected on many different times in many different contexts since. But this is a
Yeah.
perfect example of that, what you just said.
Yeah, well, I like that neurodiversity takes the shame out of
Yeah.
the equation, and that's my deepest hope in all the disability and mental health work I've done. There's still a lot of stigma associated with diagnoses and labels,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I feel that neurodiversity is this big, rainbow that we all can be under and say, we're different. It's a beautiful thing that actually God made us different. And there's still a lot of like growing to do in that conversation as
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
open it up to people. So, for example, autism has very different ways of looking at different people.
Hmm.
You've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
like autism is the same for everybody. And so there was a conversation I had with Baylor's students, and it was a mother who said, my son's autistic, and he asked me, he said, why did God make me this way? And he was frustrated with God because there's some
Hmm.
things about autism that he didn't like.
Hmm.
And so that tension, right? if we're made in God's image and God made us how we are, if there's parts of ourselves we're uncomfortable with, what does that say about God? The way we understand ourselves being made in God's image. So I invite kind of people to join me in thinking and praying about that. What's our theology about neurodiversity, disability, and mental health, and where does God fit in to
Mm.
this idea?
Very complex
Mm-hmm.
set of issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So one of the really interesting constructs that you use in the book is at the beginning of each chapter, you have a parable that you've created, which is inspired by the stories of Jesus in the Bible. That was such a great idea. I love that. How did you choose that and choose that route for the entire book?
That was my favorite part to write, I have to say. I love that so much. I would like to write a whole nother book, just of these
Good.
parables. Like I could
Good.
keep going. So I did a lot of research in the field of neurodiversity and had data and all of that. And so as I was putting the book together as a resource for the church, I wanted to get back to storytelling because really I think that's what helps open our hearts is the stories. And so I went through my research and really thought and prayed and I asked God, I said, okay, what's the God story about neurodiversity? And that's where I realized it's there. The Gospels are filled with stories about neurodiversity. We just have to dig a little deeper, and really see
Yeah.
what's behind the scenes. And I believe there's a lot there.
Well, I'm so glad you chose that. I mean, talk about looking at the world from a different perspective, right, than we typically do. That's what I loved about it, is that, just like when I first read Frederick Buechner, it's like, oh, I didn't ever think of it that way before. So many times when I read his work, and what you did with those parables has that same flavor for me. I didn't
Oh,
think of it that way before.
yeah. Well, did you have a favorite one? I'm just curious.
No, well, I mean, that's like, who's your favorite child kind of. I don't try to pick and choose, but
Yeah.
I enjoyed them all. I mean, honestly. Another thing I really like that you did in the book is you include uh, other authors who I've interviewed. And you talk about their work, Lamar Hardwick and Lisa Miller in particular, which,
Oh, yes.
excellent books that I highly recommend. But Lisa also says this about your book. I am so grateful and delighted for this sacred work. And so I love it when authors who are kind of in adjacent areas collaborate. And you mentioned how important collaboration is to you. Um, Compared to every other industry I've ever been in, authors collaborating lends itself better to that than any other industry because so many of those are so competitive. You'd never, think about collaborating with your arch rival competitor. Whereas here, I mean, it's a win-win, kind of a situation. Because if you and another author are writing in similar areas, if a person likes their book, they're going to like your book and vice versa, right? So I mean,
Mhm.
it's such a win-win. So thank you for doing that. But I mean, how do you see that whole area of collaboration?
Oh, definitely. In fact, I'm giving a workshop at the Institute for Disability and Theology, and I invited a partner to join me because I realized, this conversation would be so much richer if I had a conversation partner. And so I'm excited about that. It's a theologian who identifies as neurodivergent. And so that's really what this movement is about, and I try to remind people that we all have a God story and honoring each other's God story and taking time to really listen to it. And so I've shared a little bit about my God story of neurodiversity, and I've collected the stories of others really as an invitation. And that's what this is all about. So I hope people who read the book and share about it will create spaces for those sacred conversations about neurodiversity that really honors, the full flourishing of everyone. Because there's so many people just um, hungering to be truly seen and valued for who they are.
Hmm, hmm. You mentioned the Institute, and I spoke, a couple weeks ago, as I mentioned to you, with Topher Endres.
Yes.
also
yes.
involved in that organization. And you all have an annual conference.
Yes, it's coming up. It's in Denver, Colorado. So if folks can get there, there's also an online option to attend the conference. So come, my workshop will be Wednesday afternoon. I would love for people to join us.
And could you say again the name of the institute? Because I'm not going to
The
say it
Institute
correctly.
for
So,
Theology and Disability.
Institute for Theology and Disability. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
So one of the other endorsements for your book comes from Rudolph P. Reyes II, who says, Blessed Minds is a must-have book on why and how to embrace neurodiversity in the church. So what kind of advice do you have for churches maybe they're not as far along in actually implementing anything related to neurodiversity?
Have conversations about it, and that's what this book is. It's the tool for churches to, and that's why I call it breaking the silence. It's a way to have a conversation, to um, listen to the stories in the book, and hopefully that'll create space for people to reflect on their own stories. Um, Storytelling is really the most powerful tool we have to dismantle stigma and shame. And Professor Reyes is actually who I'm leading my workshop with.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't
So,
realize.
yeah, so he is awesome, and I'm excited to be working with him. Um, I hope that churches will see this book also as permission to think outside the box. That's some of the research that the other scholar I worked with is, she did a study about Minecraft. This is Erin Rafferty.
Mm-hmm.
Minecraft and what we could learn for the church's sake about how kids interact with Minecraft.
Really?
And what she found was, in the Minecraft worlds, there's community built, there's relationships that happen, and there's a level of playfulness that helps people form those bonds. And so what she's saying to the church, and I talk a little bit in my book,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
about how we can learn from that and bring play and games into the church in worship and fellowship and Bible study, and just kind of loosen up a little bit.
That was a great analogy, of Minecraft. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, as we have several authors or new authors in our audience. What suggestions do you have for them, for folks who are not as far along as you are in terms of publishing?
I would say to give yourself time and space to dream. And that's been something I've tried to nurture as a faith leader, as a writer, as a creative person, really honoring that that's who we are, and to allow ourselves the time and space to be free to dream and think the thoughts that most delight us. And I've been privileged to have sabbatical time, so that's where this book really started to come together in 2023. I had a Lilly Endowment Clergy Renewal Grant,
Nice.
and and so my national job and my church job gave me a 3-month sabbatical
Wow.
at the same time. And with those funds, I was able to go to Kauai. So I was in
Mm.
Hawaii for 3 weeks and did a lot of dreaming and praying and had spiritual direction and retreats. And it was just a beautiful time for me to connect to my creative self. So it doesn't have to be Hawaii, right? I mean, that was like a once in a lifetime.
Sure,
But I
sure.
have created a rhythm once a month. I go to a sacred space. It's a urban retreat center, Fall
Hmm.
Creek Abbey, and I go from like 9 to 3, and it's my time. It's my God time. It's my time to pray, to color, to walk, talk to God. And that's really how I keep myself connected to that creative source.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
nurturing, really nurturing that which enlivens us and makes the sparks in our brains, light up.
Well, I know you're in the midst of, launching a new book, but are there any future books or other future plans that you're able to talk to us about?
I would love to keep writing. We had talked about the parables of Jesus. I had so
Yeah.
much fun writing that. I would love to do like a whole book, of
Hmm.
imaginative stories that are inspired by the biblical stories.
What about a book that's kind of another level of specificity on the how-to part that's a follow-on to this.
Ooh,
Have you
that's a great
thought
idea.
about something like that? I mean, this is great for
Yeah.
churches that need to be convinced,
Mm-hmm.
or need to take the first steps. But I think a follow-on that is even kind of a layer below that, so to speak,
Yeah.
in terms of practicality would be really helpful.
That would be fun to write. Yeah,
Good.
the neuro-inclusive church, a
Yeah.
manual.
And you just like you interview a lot of pastors and others for stories of this, I bet you could, do the same about best practices and learning from,
Definitely.
all the different experiences, obviously your own church and all the organizations that you're with, but I bet there's others too that, that would be food for a lot of wealth.
Yeah, and so that's something, I invite the audience, maybe you're the one, whoever's listening, to say, hey, that's the book I want to write. So that would be great if someone else does it first. Great. Jump on
Amen.
in.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, thanks so much for all your work and many congratulations on the new book. Again, it's Blessed Minds,
Thank
Breaking the Silence About Neurodiversity. I really hope it does well. I'm sure it will. And please check out Sarah's website, sarahgriffithlund.com, and Chalice Press is at chalicepress.com. Sarah, thanks again, and really wish you the best of all your work.
Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you, and you keep having fun too.
I'll try.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.